Today I decided I was going to do, all right, not today, a couple of weeks ago, I decided I was going to do a movie review of the 1988 movie Crossing Delancey, which many of you may have seen at the time, many of you may have seen since. I think for some people it's considered a bit of a classic, especially for Jews, I think. I initially thought that it would be kind of a light, fluffy review, and in a way it will be. I have had, as most of you know, I'm disabled and I use a walker when I'm not using a wheelchair. So basically, when I go out, I use a wheelchair, and when I'm at home, I use a walker and grip bars. And as a result, I have a very severely painful torn rotator cuff, and have had for over a year, but it's gotten quite a bit worse lately. And my doctor finally convinced me to go on tramadol, which is an opioid, and I'm not at all happy about it, and it's been very distressing. So I thought I would do something casual and light, like a review of Crossing Delancey, which is in many ways, a quite fluffy movie. But it ended up leading to especially a lot of rumination about the Lower East Side of Manhattan and my own family's history there and Jewish history there, and poverty and migration patterns and the Jewish diaspora and refugees. And so it ended up being a lot more research than I was expecting. And I just sort of went down a rabbit hole of addresses in the downtown East Side and where my grandmother was born and all this kind of thing. But it'll be kind of a fun review. Now, I am dressed my very best like the main character in the novel. How can you tell I'm an English lit person? In the movie, Izzy. And I found that very difficult. I found it very difficult to find clothes like she wore. We'll get into that in a little bit. I tried my hardest to get my hair as curly as hers. I don't think I quite succeeded, but I think I did pretty well. Just involved twisting it a lot last night when it was wet, because I do have a Jew fro. Hers is way more than mine. And now that I've had this hideous drapey bland scarf on to show you how she dresses in the movie, I am too hot. So I'm taking that off, and this is pretty much the way she would have dressed in the movie. I don't know if you've noticed, my glasses keep changing depending on the review I'm doing. Anyway, so I'll give this a try and see what you think. The first thing that is just absolutely evident in this movie is that it is very much a Jewish movie, and it's very much a New York City movie. You really can't. They're completely intertwined, the storyline and New York City and Jews in New York City and Jewish culture in New York City. When I first saw this movie, though, in 1988, I was barely aware of its being Jewish. I was raised by my maternal side of the family, which is not Jewish and is from Poughkeepsie, New York, which is kind of upstate, just north of New York City, and much more, especially in the past, of a farming community. So nothing like New York City. And I was pretty actively kept from knowing much about my Jewish heritage on my maternal side, because my family was, to be honest, somewhat anti-Semitic. And on my paternal Jewish side, I was kept from knowing some things about it because I think that my grandparents didn't want me to know about the deprivation and poverty and prejudices that they had dealt with in their lives. So watching this movie, Crossing Delancey, in 1988, I really didn't know that I was watching a movie that was exactly about, if not my heritage, then my grandmother's heritage and specifically my grandmother's heritage and my father and uncle's heritage, etc. I had read as a child the All of a Kind family series, which is it's entirely set in the New York Jewish community, and many of the novels, the children's books, are set in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. But again, I had not understood that this was my own heritage. But since then, since I saw the movie for the first time, at which time I think I was living in Toronto, I have lived in New York City for a little while, in '99, and spent more time in New York, several other occasions. Spent more time with my paternal family. I've learned a lot more about Judaism, the religion, about Jewish culture. When I lived in New York City, it was the only time I ever felt normal as a Jewish person. The way I looked, my hair, the holidays I observe, everybody knew about them. Being Jewish was just blah. It was ordinary, and people knew about it. Unlike here or most other places where you mention your holiday and it's to them very exotic and foreign and weirdly crazy religious or something. So yeah, living there, I got a different sense of that part of my history. And I've also since then done my Jewish genealogy. And one of the things I learned was that I had a great deal of family who either migrated to the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which was basically the Jewish ghetto for many years, so many decades, or were born there and grew up there. My grandmother was born there. So I learned a lot about that kind of history, and knowing all of this, watching the movie, it was like a totally different experience watching the movie. So I wanted to kind of share that background information with you, because when you watch the movie knowing that background information, it's almost like you're watching a different movie. The whole thing got me thinking a lot about, refugees, because, people weren't using those terms at the time, but clearly when my family migrated to the Lower East Side from Ukraine, they were refugees. They were absolutely refugees. It made me think about diaspora and, what does home mean when you come from a family that was constantly running, and can the descendant of that family feel a kind of nostalgic, almost homesickness for places where they've never actually lived? And that was something that was happening with me when I was watching the movie, but even more when I was researching for the movie, was this kind of starry-eyed nostalgia for the Lower East Side, the Jewish community in the Lower East Side of Manhattan that, is no longer really there, at least not the way it was. Very, I think in a way, kind of naive nostalgia for something that it was not as lovely as it kind of is in my mind, and also is in the movie. So thinking about all this stuff, and largely about the formation of the American Jewish culture via New York City, because that's really where it started. Anyway, so what I thought I'd start doing is start by telling you a little bit about the history of the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and then also the Upper West Side, because Izzy, the main character in the novel, is very she's from the Lower East Side. She appears to have been born and raised there, and she really wants to sort of shift her identity, her career, her social life to the Upper West Side of Manhattan. So I'm going to talk a bit about what that is all about too. So Lower East Side is very small. At the moment, it's about 0.58 of a square mile. So 0.58 square miles. So I can't even do that in plural, square miles. It's just over half a mile. Apparently, it used to be a bit bigger. Some parts of it are now kind of chopped off and are their own communities, but it was always very, very tiny. And by about 1900, it was known as the most crowded neighborhood in the world, which you can imagine brings all kinds of problems with it. Its history goes back almost to the beginning of European settlement on the island of Manhattan when it was still called New Amsterdam. So early 1600s. It wasn't densely inhabited by Europeans when they first came, but it was known as, I don't know how to pronounce this, Corlear's Hook or Corlear's Hook, just by nature of the shape of that part of the island. By 1816, it was inhabited more by Europeans. And here's a quote from someone observing it in 1816, saying that it was notorious for streetwalkers, a resort for the lewd and abandoned of both sexes. By 1821, and this is another quote, its streets were abounding every night with preconcerted groups of thieves and prostitutes. Remember, it's called Corlear's Hook? That apparently is where the term hooker comes from. So it's pretty notorious. By 1833, this is where some of the very first tenement buildings in New York were built. So they were sort of purpose built for multifamily dwellings, a bit like a kind of apartment building with a central entrance. Stairs, usually about 5 stories high, brick, pretty grim right from the start. It was in about 1880 that Jews started pouring into New York because the pogroms in Europe had gotten much worse. I've talked about pogroms in some of my other videos. These were anti-Semitic riots sanctioned by the governments, involved murder, rape, destruction of property, beatings. And it wasn't just the pogroms, but also just a lot of systemic oppression of Jews, like higher taxes for Jews, and a lot of sort of baked in inequality for Jews in Eastern Europe. And so Jews started, as refugees, leaving and pouring into New York and moving to the Lower East Side, presumably because it was cheap. These were mostly tenement buildings at the time. They had no plumbing within them. So you imagine a tenement building that's holding, many families in it, including babies, with no plumbing. They were extremely overcrowded. There was a lot of disease. It became quickly an area with a lot of street vendors. People would come with their carts, some of them hand-pulled or hand-pushed, often pulled by a horse, and they would line up along the major streets on the Lower East Side and create these markets, these outdoor markets, including in the winter. So that would sort of add to the crowding, and imagine all the horse poo and outhouses and chamber pots, which pee and poo in your own apartment, and coal heating in these apartments. Not a lot of air. Only later were there laws passed to create sort of air shafts so that each apartment could get more fresh air. In the summers, it was very, very hot. There was a lot of people would just move out onto their tiny little fire escapes and try to sleep there because it was so hot. It was completely Yiddish. Yiddish, it was the Eastern European Jewish language, not the same language as Hebrew, different language. So that was the day-to-day language of the people. So the whole neighborhood was Yiddish. By about the 1910s, some Jews who were doing a little bit better were moving out to Brooklyn, but the neighborhood still remained very, very Jewish for a long time. My own great-grandparents arrived in this area about 1890 from a place called Biela Tserkov in the Ukraine, which means white church. It was so bad there that the Jews, instead of calling the place white church, called it black church. It was so bad for Jews there. So my great-grandparents moved. The big crow just flew right by my window. Moved to that area. They moved specifically to a building 168 Suffolk, which is still there and is right smack in the middle of the Lower East Side. Very soon thereafter, both my grandparents, most of their brothers and sisters arrived, and then they sent for their parents in 1898. And into all of this, my grandma was born in 1903. I was very lucky to find a woman named Beverly, my grandmother's sister's daughter. So my first cousin once removed or something like that. So my grandma's niece. She was about 90 when I found her, and she's the one who was able to give me most of the information I'm passing on to you about my family. She told me that the family lived on the main floor of 168 Suffolk Street and had a little poultry store of some kind, and the census forms that I've found back this up. I've tried to figure it out, but as near as I can tell, they had live chickens either in the store itself or just out back of the store. There were no yards or anything, but there might have been a little sort of paved patio kind of where the chickens could kind of peck around. They'd be killed on site for the people who wanted to eat chickens. Presumably they were kosher chickens, killed in a kosher manner. And I know that my grandmother, as a very little girl, had to deliver eggs. So they lived right behind the little shops. They were on the main floor too, in what would have been a tiny apartment. She had to deliver eggs up all 5 floors of her tenement building every morning before she went to school. So it was not an easy life. I had other family living there on my grandpa's side who presumably were working in the garment factories and got tuberculosis as a result. And so then they moved from there to Colorado, where there was a specifically Jewish tuberculosis sanatorium set up because of all the Jews getting tuberculosis in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. So it really gives you a sense of how bad it was. Running water was in little spigots outside right next to the outhouses. It was really bad. Interestingly, and probably not surprisingly, the area by about this time had become quite associated with what we would now call left-wing politics, socialism, anarchism, communism, pre-communist Russia. That's not a big surprise. Those were the politics of a lot of the Jews who had come over in the first place. There was a pretty large socialist movement in Eastern Europe, Jewish socialist movement in Eastern Europe at the time, something that tends to arise when people are very poor, so it's not a huge surprise. My grandma and her family left the Lower East Side before 1920. Somewhere around 1917, there were some health code regulations imposed on the area, and you were no longer allowed to have your chickens indoors, or at least that's what I heard. So they ended up moving to New Jersey and continuing the chicken business. So, my family is very much a part of this, and because I've been doing my genealogy, I've researched the Lower East Side at that time a lot, but not afterwards. And so I'm going to tell you some more about what it was like there after that, because this is the community into which Izzy, our main character, was born. But I just want to note that a whole bunch of big stars grew up in that neighborhood. Eddie Cantor, Al Jolson, George and Ira Gershwin, Jimmy Durante, Irving Berlin. These are like central to popular culture in America, in like just as sort of movies hit and musicals and Broadway and Hollywood and this kind of thing. So, it was a hotbed for culture. After World War II, the Lower East Side, and I'm reading this here, it became the first racially integrated neighborhood in New York City, which kind of surprises me. I would have expected that was happening a lot earlier. Before that, though, the Lower East Side was like cheek by jowl. It was like butt up against Chinatown, Little Italy. So I guess they don't consider that integrated because they weren't literally living in the same buildings, but they were very close to each other. A little later, another wave of sort of radical artists started, like beat poets and stuff, started to be drawn into this area. It was cheap. There was cheap food. So, you've got this kind of melting pot culturally, politically, artistically. By the 1960s, a lot of the Jews had left, which is what I had always believed. In fact, I thought they had left earlier, although I did know that one of my cousins committed suicide off the roof of a tenement building in 1958. So some of them were definitely still there. Around this time, and a little bit before, there was a push to demolish and replace the housing because the housing was pretty lousy. But that would have pushed all of the poor people out, and that never came to fruition. But what did come to fruition is trade unions got together these sort of housing cooperatives and built apartment blocks. And this is, now we're back to the movie Crossing Delancey again, this is in 1950 when the Hillman Housing Corporation came together and built something called Cooperative Village. And that is where our grandmother, Bubby is the Yiddish word for grandmother, so it's pretty much the universal word for grandmother if you're Jewish. Izzy's Bubby is living in one of those housing projects. This one was built right at the beginning of where the Williamsburg Bridge was built, which was built right around when my grandma was born. So she can see the bridge from her window, and you can see that in some of the shots in the movie. There were, I'm just looking at this, 4,500 apartments in 12 buildings. So it was still very crowded, but it was set up to be more equitable. The rent was regulated. People couldn't be kicked out. Everyone who lived in the place had a say in how the place was run. Those laws only started changing. Well, they changed in 1986, and this movie is shot in 1988. But even in 1986, when the laws started to change, there were provisions set up so those who were already living there, many of whom at this point were retired, could not be kicked out, and their rent could not be bumped up. So this is the setting in which Bubby is living in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And this is where a lot of the action takes place because Bubby and Izzy are very, very close, although Bubby's a little bit meddling. As I was reading all of this and as I was watching the movie, I was thinking, I didn't know that the Lower East Side was still so Jewish in the 1980s. I wish very much that I had gotten a chance to spend more time, any time there, really. I didn't go there much when I was living there. I didn't go there with my grandma in the 70s. I don't think she wanted me to see that world at all because it was very poor and gritty and difficult. She took me to like the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Radio City Music Hall, the Forest Hill Synagogue, like all these signs that we were moving up, right? Not where she came from, which is something she wanted to leave as far behind her as she could. And yet when I was watching this, like the opening scenes with Izzy walking through this neighborhood, I just felt this kind of ache in me for something not exactly home, but something that was mine that I had never been able to call mine or something. It's my own heritage, it's my own story, my own history or something. And this movie itself, it feels like the whole movie is a love song to a disappearing world, the Jewish community of the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And the ache is, I don't know how other people feel when they watch it. Maybe if they'd lived there, they wouldn't feel that ache at all. I don't know. Now let's juxtapose this all with the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which is where Izzy wants to establish herself and her identity and her culture. She wants to be a part of this culture, not the Lower East Side's culture. She has her own little apartment there. She has a really good job there. She has some friends there. Now, the Upper West Side is, almost 2 square miles. It's 1.9 square miles. It was about like the early 1900s, so right about when my grandma was born, that the neighborhood really got going as a neighborhood that was sort of had an infrastructure and was sort of purpose built. It was primarily residential. It had brownstones, which are, when you watch Sesame Street, you know how they all sit on the front stoop? That's a brownstone, right? Everybody knows Sesame Street, I think. They also had larger, expensive apartment blocks and townhouses. A big part of why the architecture here was different was because now elevators were something that you could have in residential buildings. They weren't as expensive to build, and so you could have them in your own building. So immediately you've got a whole different, if you don't have to be schlepping, to use a good Yiddish word, schlepping up staircase after staircase after staircase to get up to your apartment with all your stuff or whatever. But if you have an elevator, it's immediately a different living situation. And nobody's ever really wanted to tear down those buildings. They're still all there because they were better living right from the start. The neighborhood was, right from the start, Jewish. To an extent, nothing like the Lower East Side, though. Initially, it was German Jewish immigrants. Despite the fact that Hitler rose in Germany, at that time, the German Jewish situation was much better than that in Eastern Europe, which is where my family was from. So the German Jewish immigrants would not have really been refugees at that time. They would have been doing better financially, probably, culturally, educationally. They would have been more accepted in their culture in Germany. So for them to have moved to the Upper West Side was a choice not born of desperation, not born of poverty, not born of degradation, persecution. But then by about 1930, around 1930, then there was a wave of refugees coming in to the Upper West Side, escaping Hitler. And at this point now, the community is about 30% Jewish, as opposed to the Lower East Side, which was, I didn't get the percentages, but must have been nearly 100% Jewish. My big question, though, is how did they do this? In 1924, America passed a bill specifically to keep out racially inferior groups like Jews. So I'm not sure how all of these Jews came pouring into the Upper West Side at this time, unless perhaps the bill only thought of Eastern European Jews as racially inferior, as opposed to those from, say, Germany. That is possible. Jews from Eastern Europe would predominantly have been peasants, whereas Jews from Germany would not have been considered peasants, and maybe there was therefore a distinction. I don't know. I'm curious about that. If you know, I would love to find out. the Upper West Side now is, and in the 80s was nowhere near as ethnically diverse as the Lower East Side is and was by the 80s. It was, now, yeah, it's spacious, airy, cultured, wealthy, far less crowded. It's got shishi shops, affluence. If you've seen Mrs. Maisel, her apartment, Upper West Side. So it's a very, very different world. I actually stayed there when I was first living in New York and looking for a place. I had met a man here in Vancouver at my synagogue. I had said that I was going to be moving to New York, and he says, "Oh, look me up when you come into town." I thought, "Oh, okay, whatever." And so I called his house when I moved to New York, and his father, who was in his 80s, answered the phone and said, "So, when are you coming to stay here?" Apparently, these two made a habit of letting sort of wayward Jews stay with them rent-free for periods of time. So I think I lived there for like 3 weeks. They had one of those great big huge apartments, kind of like in The Odd Couple, the movie, or in Mrs. Maisel. It was a little bit run down. It's a doorman, an elevator. They had cleaning lady, a black cleaning lady, and I mentioned that because she was not Jewish, although there are black Jews, but she knew how to keep the kitchen kosher, which I don't even know how to do properly. So they were very observant. They had this huge apartment. They had a kosher kitchen. People would put free stuff in the laundry room that I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this is free. It was just junk. They didn't want any more, like a cordless phone, which at the time was a big deal. There was a huge kosher sushi place just down the street. So I'm giving you these sort of details to give you a sense of the difference between this and the Lower East Side, and why someone like Izzy. No, and I should mention, obviously, if you come from this background, the Upper West Side, you can probably afford a much better education than if you were coming from the Lower East Side, where you were probably working. So for example, my grandmother's siblings in the 1900 census form, when there's the question of what were the people's jobs, and you look down and here you've got like a 5-year-old and his job is in shop. All the kids were working. Oh, squirrel. All the kids were working in the poultry store. So you can imagine their education is not going to be on the same level as someone on the Upper West Side who's got way more money and way more comfort. So you got an overview of the world that Izzy is from versus the world that she wants to become a part of, or honestly is a part of, is becoming a part of, and where she dresses like this. So let's move on to the movie itself. It was originally a play by Susan Sandler in 1985 at the New York Jewish Repertory Theater. So right from the start, it was kind of a Jewish play. It was just, nobody was pretending it was anything other than what it was. My favorite actress in this was Rizel Bojic. I think that's how you say her name. Rizel is like Rachel. She herself, she was from Poland. The biography, I was reading different biographical information about her. It's a little bit muddled, but her parents were in theater in Poland. Obviously, that would have been Yiddish theater. She was born in 1914, and soon thereafter was herself on the stage, an actor. The Yiddish theater was big in this part of the world at this time. It was very popular. Remember, movies weren't a big thing yet. So the stage was, and it wasn't highbrow most of the time. You know, it was a lot of comedy and goofy tricks and acrobatic acts and, you know, and serious theater, as many things. She married an actor, and the two of them performed together their whole lives. I had trouble figuring out when she left Poland. Again, we have this problem of, I have understood that after 1924, Jews weren't really allowed to migrate to America. And it's at that point that they started migrating to places like Argentina and South Africa. And I have family in both of those places. And she and her husband they were performing Yiddish theater in Argentina in 1939 when the war began. And somehow, because of this, and I don't know how, they got to migrate to America. I know I have another cousin I found who was a ballet dancer and was in Argentina, I believe, performing ballet when the war started, and he also somehow managed to migrate to America, but I think in his case he was offered a job there. Perhaps that was the case with Reisel Wojcik and her husband. I'm not quite sure. Unfortunately, though, their son was still in Poland, and he was murdered in the Holocaust. So, I mean, who can imagine what that feels like? So Reisel continued to perform with her husband until he died. They often performed in the Catskills, although I'm also sure they performed in the Lower East Side. The Catskills were also known as the Borscht Belt, which borscht, it was an Eastern European dish, so that includes a lot of Jews. Eastern European Jews ate borscht, so the Borscht Belt was the Jewish summer getaway. If you've seen Dirty Dancing, which came out right about the same time as Crossing Delancey, it is set in the Catskills in a Jewish summer camp, right in the Borscht Belt. So that's what you're seeing there. And I know there's also some scenes in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel that are set in the same circumstances. A Catskills summer retreat with little cabins and activities and Yiddish theater. So moving on, the star of the movie is played by Amy Irving, who was born in 1953 in Palo Alto, so very far from the Lower East Side. Like me, she's I'm 52% Jewish, actually. She's 50% German, Jewish, and was not raised Jewish, as was the case with me. Like me, she comes from a quite creative family, a lot of people in the arts and such. And she's got the hair, boy, oh boy. The other sort of one of the other main characters is played by Peter Reigert. He's one of her two love interests in the movie. He was born in 1947, raised in the Bronx as a non-observant Jew. Non-observant just means that they didn't follow all the Jewish rules and stuff. They maybe didn't practice Shabbat and light the candles every Friday night and stuff like that. But they were probably culturally Jewish would be what they probably were. His mother was a piano teacher, so again, a family with creative people in it. And his father was a food wholesaler, which I think is interesting because in this movie, Peter Reigert plays a guy who sells pickles for a living. So there's a little bit of a connection there. And then the final sort of main character, one of the other love interests, is, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name because he's from the Netherlands, but Jeroen Aert Krabbe or something like that, from the Netherlands. He too was raised in an artistic family. His character is clearly Goy. He's Goy meaning non-Jewish, and it's a slightly derogatory term, not very derogatory, but doesn't know culture like a Jew knows culture kind of thing. He's not Jewish. The irony, though, is that I believe after, but I don't know, after this movie was made, but definitely well after he was born, this actor learned that his mother was herself Jewish and lost her entire family in the Holocaust. And this was something that was hidden from him when he was younger. It's a pretty heartbreaking story. So it's just an interesting irony that the character in the movie, who's kind of like the annoying goy character, was actually half Jewish, and I don't know when he learned that information. So now onto the movie itself. Isabel Grossman is played by Amy Irving, and she's called Izzy. Izzy is about 35 years old. She's single, obviously Jewish. She's working and living on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. She works at a really dream job in my mind. It's a small bookstore, very literary, very cultured, very loved by the man who owns it, and he's very kind to people who work there. And they're kind of like a cultural literary center in the Upper West Side. They hold a lot of readings, author signings, literary events, etc. So it sounds like like what a great job, Izzy is happy being single, and states this quite a bit, especially to her grandmother, because her grandmother, Bubby Cantor, or Bubby, hired a matchmaker for Izzy. Now, I think we all know what a matchmaker is. Not only, at that point, that would have been an extremely old-fashioned thing to do for someone. And Izzy is outraged. Matchmakers, though, are in many cultures traditionally. They find a spouse for you. This is what they do. They find someone that they think you would be a good match with to marry. And, Izzy is furious and this is when she has this whole speech to her grandmother, "I'm not looking for a husband. I'm happy." And I always wonder with the movie, are we supposed to believe her or not? I want to believe her, because I would have been very happy with her life at that age. Anyway, the matchmaker matches her to the pickle man, Sam Posner, who is played by Peter Riegert. The pickle man is working in and running the long-standing pickle store that was founded by his own father in the Lower East Side of Manhattan when it was, really the Jewish neighborhood, although it still is quite a bit. It's not a glamorous job. So, the pickle store, I'll just show you images of it. It's actually shot in a real pickle place. I forget what it was called. Let me see if I can. No, it doesn't say, but it was a real Gus's Pickles or something like that. So he's literally plunging his hand into barrels of pickles all day long. Not glamorous, not cultured, not bookish. His life, his work isn't, at any rate. Definitely not a world that Izzy wants to marry into. He himself, he actually, to me, he looks a bit like my uncle. Because I think he's a good-looking guy. He's gentle. He's soft-spoken. He's respectful, especially to Bubby. And he's humble. But he's not weak. I don't know why people have this idea that men with these characteristics would also be weak. He's not. And he will stand up for himself if he needs to, and he has strong views about life and himself and his future and etc. But he's not flashy. His job's not flashy. As I'm looking at all of this, I'm just like thinking, why would she want to leave this world? This world seems so lovely, such a strong sense of community. Why wouldn't she want to marry into this world? It reminds me a lot of where I live in Vancouver, which is Little Italy, and I've lived here since 1990. Just this tight-knit, strong community. Initially, where I live, not. It was also very poor, although that's been changing. But yeah, Sam Posner, her romantic interest, or, well, matched to him. She says she's not interested in him. Clearly the old world of the Lower East Side. Now, her other romantic interest of the new world, the new Jewish world, and the new not just Jewish world of the Upper West Side, she's smitten with, as I wrote here, a smarmy older goy turd named Anton. Jerome Krabi, the actor, acts him very well. He just makes your skin crawl. You're just like, no, Izzy, don't, Izzy, don't. He's an author, of course. He's a successful writer, so she's drawn to this. He's older, so he's kind of more established than she could possibly be at 35. He plays the part so well. He's got this very fake humility. He clearly thinks a great deal of himself and his art. He's just full of himself. But he pretends to be humble so that other people will praise him. And he absolutely just sort of sucks in the praise and adoration he gets from Izzy. He's attracted to her entirely because she worships him in the way that a woman his own age wouldn't, because she would see through him. He has all these sort of tricks for seducing Izzy, and you can tell other women. He uses these starstruck women to boost his own ego and also his own career, to help him raise himself up in practical ways, and then just sort of in terms of his own sense of himself. He is the new world, the Upper West Side. I mean, to the viewer, it's a clear choice. But of course, to make it a movie, it's not a clear choice to Izzy. In fact, to her, the clear choice is Anton for a great deal of the movie. And I don't want to give away too much, but we know how these movies end. Bubby is a revelation to me. I loved Bubby. This was Rizal Wojcik's only English acting job. Only English movie, only English, as I don't think she'd done any acting in English. Everything had been Yiddish. And every review you read of this movie praises her. She's fantastic. She lives in an apartment that in itself is almost a museum at this point. She even has, like, I believe I see a little bit of an old wringer washer in it. You can see the bridge through her window. She's got, stuff that's really old, stuff that's not quite as old in it, as is the case with old people, especially if they don't have a lot of money. So her home itself is clearly much nicer than the tenement building homes of the past, but still very humble. The relationship that she has with the pickle man is fantastic. They have the most amazing chemistry. They're so adorable together and so sweet. And a lot of people go, this is their movie. It's the Pickle Man and Bubby's movie. Izzy is just kind of on the side. I wouldn't go so far as to say that, but I can definitely see why people would say that. They're lovely together. You just watch it and you go, aww. Both he and Izzy love Bubby. the intergenerational relationship, there's no sort of condescension on the part of the younger people towards Bubby. She's an integral part of their community, an integral part of their lives. She's important to them. They value her. She values them, even though Izzy is really angry with her. But the fact that she can yell at Bubby in a way shows how close they are and how honest they are with each other. Like, they're not playing games with each other. They're like, this is who I am. This is what I am. So there's no sort of deference to the older generation to the point of pretending you're something that you're not. So she is by far my favorite character in the movie. I didn't know quite where to fit this, so I have a little section, tiny little section on honorable mentions and dishonorable mentions about things in the movie. Let's get the two dishonorable mentions out of the way first. There is an often criticized, really just flat out racist taxi scene in the movie. It's very short. It's totally unnecessary for the movie. It could have been cut out. It's just a taxi driver. I think he's supposed to be Jamaican. I can't remember. And he's a bad driver and he's just a total stereotype. And there was no need for it in the movie. So that should have just gone. Another thing that I found just like, why is this even in the movie? There's a scene where the two of them, Izzy and a friend of hers are at the Y in the Upper West Side to go to the gym, and they're changing their clothes, and her friend is wearing the most absurd lingerie. She's wearing like a garter belt and high, those long stockings and like sexy black lace and stuff in the middle of a work day. Who does that? Like, especially when they know they're going to the gym, because they're going to have to change all of their underwear, because you can't wear those when you're jogging or something. So I just thought that was just completely incongruous. It had nothing to do with the rest of the movie. I didn't know why it was there. Unless I missed something, you can tell me. Women just don't dress like that on a work day underneath their work clothes. Like, unless they're expecting to get laid. I don't know. Anyway, so. But there is a massive honorable mention to, Ronnie Gilbert in a self-defense class for older Jewish women in the Lower East Side. She is to die for. Now, I didn't even know Ronnie Gilbert was Jewish, but I did know who she was when I first saw the movie, and I thought, Ronnie Gilbert? What's she doing in this movie? So she was in the group The Weavers in the 40s, I believe, and the 50s. With Pete Seeger. You've probably heard of Pete Seeger. And they had these lovely harmonies, and they sang traditional folk songs, but they were also they're political activists. They got blacklisted by McCarthy during the sort of Red Scare of the McCarthy era. In the 80s, she was having somewhat of a revival. She'd come out as a lesbian by this point, and I saw her on tour at least once, I think more than once, on tour with Holly Near, who was kind of like the celebrity lesbian singer at the time. So the two of them went on tour together. One tour, more than one tour, I'm not sure. So I did know who she was when I saw this, and I was just like, oh my God, it's hilarious. It's very short. It makes no fuss about the fact that she's Ronnie Gilbert, but if you know Ronnie Gilbert, it's a really funny it's a cameo, basically. Now, more reflection on the movie. Is it a rom-com, a romantic comedy? I'd say, yeah, it has a lot of the traditional elements of a rom-com, some of which I thought were charming and some of which I found really annoying. One of the sort of really typical elements of rom-coms in the past and today is that the lead woman doesn't, she's falling for the flashy guy, maybe the bad boy, and everybody watching it knows she should be with the not flashy guy, with the calm, maybe less sexy or less overtly sexy, quiet, gentle guy who treats her better than the flashy guy. That in itself is a stereotype. I mean, flashy guys can be nice too, but anyway, and calm guys can be jerks. But that the movie trope is not that. Is that the calm guy is the nice guy that she should marry? It reminds me a little bit of Eddie Bracken from the 1940s. He was in a lot of rom-coms where he was the really nerdy, nebbishy guy. Nebbishy. That's another good Yiddish word. That's studious, kind of glasses, nerdy. That the girl should be with when she's going for the flashier guy. And the movie always ends with her realizing, oh, I love you. You're the good guy. I'm going to dump the flashy guy. The movie I'm thinking of, which you should watch, is called Miracle at Morgan's Creek. It is one hell of a movie, and he plays that kind of a role in that one. But of course, Izzy fawns all over Anton. She's completely smitten with him. She doesn't see him as we, the viewers, do. She sees him as, the epitome of this world she wants to be a part of. And she ends up treating Sam, the pickle man, which is what she calls him, pretty horribly throughout a lot of the movie. Like, honestly, if I were him, I would have said, you know what? Pfft, screw it. It reminds me of Carrie with Aiden in Sex and the City, which I bet a lot of you have seen. Let's not lie. I watched it quite religiously, which makes me worry about myself at that age. But anyway, if you remember, Carrie had Mr. Big and Aiden. This was the big love triangle in Sex and the City, and she really treated Aiden pretty poorly. The interesting thing about that though is, if you remember, she ended up with Mr. Big, not with Aiden, which was counter to sort of the usual rom-com setup. Usually they end up with the meek guy. Meek. What an awful word. Gentle guy. It was hard to watch. It's always hard to watch those movies. Like, Izzy, what are you doing? What are you doing? This is not the guy for you. Now, I wanted to talk about Izzy's fashion sense. I'm very into fashion, and her fashion sense was chosen quite carefully in this movie to match the Upper West Side, to match her idea of success, her idea of the Upper West Side, her idea of being a sophisticated literary woman. I had a really hard time. I wanted to dress to look like her as best as I could, but I had a really hard time because her clothes are so boring in the movie. They're very 80s, but not in the 80s sense that we think of, bright neons and leg warmers and huge hair. I mean, she does have huge hair, but naturally huge hair, which is different. They're very blah, very understated, quite preppy, quite modest. It's quite ironic to me because Anton, this guy she's into, has this really flashy personality, but her idea of how to look as a successful career woman in the Upper West Side is the opposite of flashy. It's kind of boring. So I thought that was sort of, kind of like a juxtaposition between his personality and the way she dressed. She was also, I think, supposed to be seen, she's the one who's a little bit meek. And I thought it was interesting because the way she dressed was almost from is I don't know if it's Yiddish or Hebrew, the word, but it's the way that highly observant Jewish women are supposed to dress, very modestly, not drawing attention to their bodies, covering, I think they have to cover their elbows, cover their collarbones, keep their clothes loose. The only thing about her that was really distinctly not from was her hair. You're not supposed to cover your hair, and she did seem to know she had nice hair, so she let her hair show. Even her makeup was she could barely, I looked and looked at photos to go, is she wearing makeup? I think a little bit of mascara, a little bit of lipstick, very little makeup. She's dressed through most of the movie. She reminded me of like an updated Annie Hall from the 1970s. And Annie Hall in that movie is sort of the quintessential goy, the shiksa, the non-Jewish woman. Very sort of a little bit frumpy. The stereotype of Jewish women, unless they're from, is quite flamboyant, bright colors, bright clothes, kind of flashy, even gaudy. Like I'm thinking about in the self-defense class with her bubby, all of those women are wearing like bright colors and stuff. So the great irony is that the flashiest thing she ends up wearing is a Stetson cowboy hat given to her by the Pickle Man, bought in the Lower East Side of Manhattan in a Jewish store using a coupon from the Jewish matchmaker. So I think it's kind of telling that her first sort of foray into expressing herself more idiosyncratically and perhaps showing her personality a little bit more is inspired by the Pickle Man, not by the artist, the writer. So I thought that was quite interesting, and I was very glad I had this hat in my wardrobe, my extensive wardrobe, so that I could kind of show you what she looked like in that. So of course he's the right guy for her. When Izzy gives her little speech to her grandmother about, Bubby, I'm not looking for love. If it comes, that's great. If it doesn't, that's great. I'm happy. I have a great job. I go on dates. I have really good colleagues. I have really good friends. She doesn't say this to Izzy, but she also has, or to Bubby, but she does have a sex life. I hear her saying all this and I go, yeah, that sounds great. Great life for a 35-year-old, great life for anybody. But I wonder if we're supposed to believe her. One of the great staples of the rom-com is that she says that she's happy, single, but of course she's not. She's lying. Perhaps just to herself, like maybe she doesn't know either, and so when she says it to her friends or her bubby, she believes it. I don't know. Sorry, I'm pausing because I'm thinking about my own life here. But I don't think we're supposed to believe her. I'm not really quite sure. So, she's got these friends who are desperate for a man. They're man mad. Their biological clocks are ticking, ticking, ticking. They really want to have children. One of the women decides to have a baby without the support of the man who is the father. So, I feel like, I'm just fixing my hair here. I feel like maybe we're supposed to just not buy it when she says she's happy. But, I was one of these. I was a single woman in my mid to late 30s, building a literary-ish career. I was a college instructor at a local college. I was single by choice. I just couldn't meet someone that I found interesting enough. I didn't want to be with the people I was meeting, but people were always asking me, I don't understand why nobody would want to be with you. You're good looking, you have a good job, you're nice, blah, 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 whatever. They'd build me up. Why wouldn't anyone want to be with you? And I'm like, people do want to be with me. I just don't want to be with them. Why is that so hard to believe that a woman might be happy single? And when I did finally, when I met Beau at 41, and then when I married him at 45, so many people said, see now, wasn't it worth the wait? I wasn't waiting. But given this sort of trope of, oh, she's lying, I don't think anyone believed me that I wasn't waiting. So that is something about the movie that bothers me. Bubby tells Sam, the pickle man, that it's important to wear a woman down with your persistence. That's not romantic. That's stalkerish. That's not good guidance. If there's anyone watching this, stalking someone is not wearing them down with your persistence. Just don't do it. There's an interesting scene in the movie where Izzy and one of her single friends, are getting food in a deli, and this older, clearly pathetic, down at the heel, maybe a little bit crazy woman comes in. She's got makeup on. Her makeup's all weird, and her dress is all like raggedy. It was once beautiful. And she starts singing for money in this old tin can. She sings Some Enchanted Evening, and the camera zooms in on Izzy's face, and she's like, oh, like the song is sending her a message like, this woman is my future. Oh my God, perish the thought. And the lyrics are, when you finally find him, run to his side and make him your own. For all through your life, you may dream all alone. Once you have found him, never let him go. So it's like, oh my God, you might have to be alone for the rest of your life. Oh God, it's a living hell. And I'm just like, oh God. And Izzy's like stricken, like, oh my God, it's true. Bugged me. This sort of ongoing about how women can't stand being alone. It's just not true. I know so many women who are happily single from young to old, happily single by choice. So many. Anyway, so I want to take it back to a little bit, just to talk about the Lower East Side and talk about the movie a little bit more. It's a very Jewish movie. The Jewish references, the viewer is nothing's explained. There's so many things you see that are Jewish or hear that are Jewish, but it's not explained. There's a whole bris service, which is the circumcision service of a baby, Jewish baby. There's reference to brachot, or finding a bracha, which is like a blessing. There's all these references to Jewish culture, to just the sense you're supposed to, as a Jew, just understand that the Lower East Side has this huge Jewish history. That matchmakers are a part of Jewish culture and they're kind of a joke. And it's all sort of taken for granted that the audience gets all these jokes. It's like one big in-joke, which is kind of refreshing because there are so many in-jokes about Christian culture in mainstream movies that most people don't even notice because that's the dominant culture. Even if they consider themselves entirely secular, they'll get a Christmas joke, for example, which is a Christian holiday, or an Easter joke, or stuff like that. But even if you don't get all these jokes, you're gonna enjoy the movie. Not just jokes, but references. You're still gonna really enjoy the movie and possibly even learn something about Jewish culture, Jewish history, etc. The Lower East Side has a realness to it. It's all shot. All the scenes in the Lower East Side are shot in the Lower East Side, including the interior scenes, like in Gus's Pickles at 84 Orchard Street, right near Broome Street. I looked it up. I spent a lot of time looking at the map. I got kind of lost in it. I got really sort of, I did way more research than I needed to do. Bubby's home is a real place. You can really see the park on Google Earth. You can really see the building that she lives in. The view is the real view. The bookstore, though, that she works in, I couldn't find a location for it. It may be a real place, but I couldn't find it when I was doing my research. every location in the Lower East Side, even the ones she just walks past, they're all real. And you watch this and you go, why would anyone want to leave this place? And that, Izzy is supposed to come to her senses and realize, I don't want to leave this. I don't think she's ever supposed to give up her Upper West Side job or anything, but, the Lower East Side is her home. It's her people, it's her community, it's her culture. And you watch it and you go, oh, definitely the right choice. Definitely. Why would she even doubt that? This is so nice. This is such a sense of belonging. This is such a beautiful community. And it did remind me, like I say, of where I live in Vancouver a lot. But I feel like both the biggest downside of the movie and also the best part of the movie is how the Lower East Side is depicted. Because it's depicted, even though, as I said, the locations are all real, there's still somehow this fairy tale aspect, just a sense that you're watching a fairy tale. That's partly helped by the fact that the soundtrack by the Roches has this lovely kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but it's got this sort of whimsical fairy tale sense to it. It's all shot and set in the fall, which is by far the most beautiful time in New York, when it's not too hot and not too cold, which most of the time in New York, it's either too hot or too cold. Trust me on this. But autumn in New York, well, it's famous. There's songs about it, And if you're watching this, you can't help but have a kind of a nostalgia for a place you've never been. But I wonder if you actually had been there, would you have this kind of nostalgia? Because the big thing they missed out, obviously intentionally, is the Lower East Side's negative sides. The grit, the filth. I mean, New York is such a dirty city, but more so in areas that have been around that long with that much poverty. The history of disease, the suffering, the incredibly hard manual labor, the heat without respite, the cold without respite. As I was looking all of this up, I found photo after photo after photo, making the Lower East Side just look like a living hell. And these photos were taken at the time that this movie was made, or the time when Izzy would have been growing up in this neighborhood. And yet you didn't get any sense of that from the movie. It all seemed so charming. You see her walking by graffiti and stuff, but somehow, I don't know, it doesn't feel as oppressive as it must have still felt for a lot of people. I feel like the camera never really angles up to show how sort of narrow the streets are and how suffocating these tenement buildings are as they sort of loom in on you. These are all the ways that I felt living in New York, and I wasn't even in the Lower East Side. It's really easy watching this movie to forget why my own family was so desperate to get out, or to not understand why she would want to get out. And yet, the people who watched the movie, I would think in the 80s there would be a lot of people who did know this background, and I'd be really interested to hear what they thought of the movie as opposed to what I felt of it, which was just this sort of, oh, I wish I'd known that world. Oh, that world is so nice. Oh, that's my world. Those are my people. I don't, in reality, Izzy's wanting to get out. It actually does make a lot of sense. It's sad, but it does. But in the movie, it doesn't.